it's repealable because it's based on an entirely non-legal idea that the state can declare objects to be illicit, and there is no such power. I mean, I refuse to be broken down into all those stages of having to jump through hoops to take what is should be mine by divine rights. They've enforced an arbitrary sensorial veil across the human condition.
Thanks for joining, everyone. We've got Darryl Bickler for this episode. Me and Darryl have known each other for a few years now in the psychedelic space, drug policy advocacy space, and I think we have both maybe garnered something of a reputation for speaking about things which maybe we find a bit uncomfortable within the psychedelic renaissance, drug policy, drug legalization overall. Darryl is certainly well versed in a lot of the linguistic terminology surrounding drug laws, which is why we're having this conversation, what's kind of sparking it. But I think just coming together to try and understand where we're both at in understanding what's happening with drugs and psychedelics, particularly in terms of being made accessible, what that all means, and where people might potentially be a bit misguided, or where they could be forgiven for speaking in certain terminologies which perhaps don't serve the situation for any positive means and might just be keeping it within certain restrictions. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Darryl and we'll just get talking, I think. And if you would like to just, you can introduce yourself a bit more and, speak about why it is that you are feeling now is the time to be talking about the kind of stuff that you are talking about.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Ollie. Yeah, we go back a few years, and I've always felt you were a kindred spirit, and I will apologize at the outset for frustrations that I have in the way that I express misunderstandings, because I have to give people the grace that it was. I'm so fortunate to having experienced this conversation over 20 years ago with Casey Hardison, and I've lived and breathed with it. That people think I don't tolerate fools gladly or something. It's not that. It has been the frustration that I've grown to understand that this is the most powerful thing, and I'm fortunate enough to be a conduit of that. It is absolutely not about me. It has nothing to do with me, and it's any more than anybody else. It's for every single person, and it's empowering, and it will transform everything once people get to understand it. And I also understand there's like a fear in people that they know there's something they're supposed to understand, but because they're fearful that they won't understand it, because I've reprimanded them for not understanding it, they kind of clam up and they start to get a little bit anxious that I've used a word that they're not familiar with, or I've confronted them in a way, and that it kind of, once they won't see it, then it's very hard to get them to approach it again to drop I drop my baggage, they drop theirs, and really try to start from first principles and see if it makes sense, because perhaps I've jumped them in at the deep end, having sat with it for so long. And I think the time is now, and each time I'm explaining it in the recent way and having conversations, as I should say. It's not just me delivering something, it's me sort of reflecting what people will say to me. So I'm not going to ramble on forever, because the cues come in my way to explain it is often just listening to people that haven't quite adopted this very human-centered, person-centered perspective that I'm talking about. And I'll just say a little bit about the basics of that, because I want us to go back to what it really is before there was laws, before there was even language, and to understand that what we're talking about is pre-language chemical biomolecular connectivity. Somehow our pathways, our consciousness can be facilitated across all kinds of new modalities. And that is, if that's not holy, I don't know what else we could use if we have to find labels. But to try and break this down, this one connection that is there into labels of convenience, always labels of convenience that divide and divide everything beyond seeing it as well, I use the word spiritual because I know every word is loaded, but it is something that is incredibly special. So why would we talk about that in the most degrading and disgusting way that doesn't even seem to be about us? It's about some so-called illicit object. It's not even about this whole experience, or even beyond any kind of, if I say whole experience, you imagining some kind of mind-blowing experiences. Everything is holy. Like it's not like there's one holy piece of land, or it's all holy. It's all holy, and our experience is holy. And what defines our experience is how we are allowed to develop and how we're allowed to experience it. And we're existing in an extremely tight, sensorial, like laboratory experiment, whereby not only are we being defined by words, as in laws, which create whole cultural narratives and also affect drug experience through certain setting and legalities, to then actually realize what we're actually defining here is not just the words, which are all these words and molecules, that list molecules that we're supposed to have this no relationship with, that they are in fact invisible. They're blocked out of the spectrum of visible light, as it were, but visible conscious experience, possible conscious experience, possible transformation experience. These are all blocked out by words, actually. And so it's a double intimacy, what I'm talking about. It's the intersection of two great things, really, drugs and law, and they both are about you, absolutely about me, you. Each person is the sole recipient of this thing we call the human race. Each one is an individual existing in a sea of other people that we potentially have connections with, and it's that connectivity with the other that is being separated out by objective language, objectifying language. And that is what I'll stop there for the moment. I think it's enough to introduce it, but just to say it's very important to me, and I want to do my best so that you will feel what I'm saying later.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for that. It's really fascinating to hear it be put forward, I think, in quite an elegant way. I really like this idea of labels of convenience to divide. I'm often struck by the deference to science, the deference to scientism when it comes to psychedelics, that almost the holiness of the experience is being replaced by the holiness of the scientists who are researching these experiences. And do you think there's something to do with the fact that because the laws are in a certain way and access is being bottlenecked in a certain way, that these labels of convenience are essentially designed within the scope of a colonial mindset to measure, to have an understanding in terms of return on investment, or have targets, have these goals that can be put in place so that you can keep churning, you can keep people in certain industries, in certain jobs, they can keep researching. There's always this machine that keeps turning.
Well, you can have materialism without necessarily sort of subscribing to every corporate profit model. We're not going to abandon the material dimension in this, even though, because that's the game we're playing, that's the level we're playing at. So what I'm talking about effectively is the key to the next level, which will join up everything, because we need to recenter ourselves in language. Because I don't know how much listeners will be sort of subscribers to linguistic determination. It's not always been something that is people accept that the power of language, but they're not always saying that it can do everything. So we're talking about, actually, the whole thing is ineffable. We're trying to get to ineffability through effability, if you like, because level one to solve it is the censorship of law, because the censorship of law fundamentally reframes the psychedelic experience, or even sort of any personal private experience, or using whatever molecules. It's not really. See, it's division. I don't want to make a fetish of any particular thing, and that's the problem. When you mentioned to me earlier today about PAR, is it?
Yeah, psilocybin access rights.
Yeah, I mean, it's a division. There is every law has one thing in common, apart from, like, it's I don't mean how it's being formed in courts and the rest of it, or by government. I mean, the one thing in common with criminal law is that it's always about you, and you are the center of it. And we talk about the laws as, because we've got these different laws, like driving laws and so-called drug laws and whatever. And so we kind of break it down and say it's about a thing. And so people think there's a cannabis law, for example, but it's actually a human law that ultimately does relate to cannabis. But the fact that it relates to cannabis is irrelevant, because the principle is that they've got this law that regulates your consciousness and your connection with nature, or other, shall we say. Your peaceful connection with other has already been predetermined. And so it's a bit of a fetish if you come along and say, what about my little pot of green weed every month? It's like an entitlement. Okay, it's entitlement. I mean, I'm not saying we should live without entitlements, but entitlements are things that you get through being needy in some way. Whereas universal rights are completely different, that they are genuinely empowering, that they offer you dominion over yourself rather than through the lens of an object. So this is the thing that I'm trying to rally against.
With my medical cannabis prescription, it's, as much as people talk about it being empowering in one sense, okay, you have freedom to use your medicine, as and when required. What you've actually got is a dispensation. What you've got is cannabis-based medicinal products are the thing that is legal. Cannabis itself is not legal. I have a license to possess this product, which means it's all it is a dispensation, which is an enactment of control, and then saying, but we.
Well, hang on. I'm going to. I know it's generally rude to interrupt, but at this point, trust me, I have to.
Yeah.
Because this is okay. So this is where we have to be as open and nice as possible about what you've said, because what you've said is, you've used a narrative, and it's my belief that we're all under hypnosis of language. It is a form of it predetermines our thinking. Some of the constructs that we're given, we think in those terms, whether it be about what racial types there are, and or what any subject that is this personal is about. We try to label it, and the label is always an objectification of self, because here we've used the words about legal and illegal. Now those two words are keywords. They're definitely keywords. They're not normal words, because as soon as you do that, you push a button and you fly into a separate dominion called legalese, because you can't use the word legal without invoking, you're going to say something legal. Okay. So you've used the word legal. I say it's like it's there, it's in the language model. And I suggest, although I'm not saying you're in any way your conversations are contrived, mine certainly are quite contrived because I've said the same thing in many ways, but finding a new thing today for you, it's beautiful that we could have this conversation. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is that what the language model that you've been given is, apart from just that normal thing that we identify objects, right? Okay, we might just like to think we're in some panpsychic universe, we're all connected and everything is conscious. But in the level we're playing at, we identify objects and we give labels to them. And the key object here is drugs, of which, forget about which ones, but drugs which we exist in a continuum with. So we're permeable to some object that we can define the material dimension. It is that. And we have part of that in us because we have the receptor for it. We have the endocannabinoid system in this case, and then we're permeable to it. So we're already in a kind of relationship with it. In fact, we're already connected with it in a million ways, culturally and sort of like evolutionary and everything. We're already connected. But then there's some severance that happens through words, that words can interfere with that relationship. And that's kind of this membrane of law that exists around us that's kind of defining our relationship with our environment through those words. And that's why those words are really important, because as soon as you imagine that the thing they're defining you about, namely your access to cannabinoids, for example, in that case, it's really broad than that, as we know, but what they're doing there is they are giving your legal agency. You are the legal subject. Like I said, all laws apply to you. You are the center. And you're giving that to the object through a language model. And I won't shy from saying the words, but I've always getting the impression now when I say the words, it kind of switches people off because they have that like, teacher anxiety. I didn't understand this class and, switched off, and it's kind of a bit of an upsetting point for them because they hear something they don't understand. So, all I'll say is it took me months to understand it. In fact, I thought of this bit. Casey kind of picked me, set me going on this, and then I kind of worked this out. But there is a figure of speech, shall we say, and I never sure whether it's actually called a transferred epithet or whether it's called hyperlargy. But what that is the convenience, the labels of convenience, whereby instead of talking about ourselves, we talk about the object as if it was us or is animated by us. So we animate objects to ascribe function to them, like a walking stick that doesn't actually walk, of course, but we give our walking to the stick. When we could say it's a stick to help me with my walking, that would be like the full obvious way. But we know exactly what we mean when we transfer. So what's actually happening is that the subject, that's you, is being given to the object, and it makes complete sense. It makes complete sense to do that, except when the subject is in legalese, the legal subject. And the legal subject is the word that is being used in the equation of words called the law to balance your reasonable freedom with public protection. That's what most laws are supposed to do, is to kind of, give a bit of freedom and then balance it with some restraint so you don't harm other people. That whole discussion that you're having, you've actually removed yourself from that, all your rights and your entitlement to proportionality of interference or equality or not being discriminated against. All of those you kind of blacked out completely in words, and then had the audacity to take the quintessentially most important word, legal, and misuse it as if it applied to your cannabis. Is once you fully understand the ramifications of what I'm trying to explain, you will see it as absurd, and
Hmm.
you'll smirk that you did it for so long. And
Mm.
I'm not saying that makes you in any way slow at all. It took me ages. It's just that the language model and the amount of contact you have with it, because you're so active in so many places where this kind of language and the sort of overly materialistic kind of misuse of speech and just cliches and nonsense is so everywhere that you can't help but kind of be framed. It's a form of hypnosis within the drug policy movement, within the psychedelic movement. You're still being programmed with misuse of language and unwittingly or whatever, out of ignorance. But it's really important because as soon as you rescue your subject from the object, then everything comes into play. That everything is possible, all the regulation. So I'll take you a bit further down this path. So because
Mm.
it sometimes it doesn't start this bit about the legal illegal drugs. It is the zenith of it. It is the most important point, but it can be eroded further down. And whilst it's not always a problem to talk about a drug as if it had that animation, I'm saying, and I'm talking about level one, not panpsychic thing. We're not there yet. So to do that, to ascribe agency to it in some way. So let's say, for example, you believe that cannabis can be taxed,
Mm.
and I'll sort of pull you up on that, not as a concept, but as a form of language, because I don't, the tax thing doesn't really concern me. That's a micro government. I'm talking about your relationship with reality of the law. So, can cannabis be taxed? It's completely impossible if you take it literally. And I'm saying take it literally because we're talking about something very important. No, cannabis cannot be taxed because cannabis does not pay taxes because cannabis is a plant. Human beings pay taxes on products. So cannabis cannot actually be taxed. Now, I know now it does possibly sound to some people like I'm being very pedantic, but I'm pulling it out because I
Hmm.
think every time we talk about drugs as some kind of otherness, we need to put ourselves back in the equation about what we're really talking about. So it's not an abstract, it's a personal
Hmm.
relationship, particularly with the law. The law is person-centered language par excellence. It can't be any more personal. And I don't think drugs could be any more intimate. So to get the language right about this. So cannabis cannot be illegal because the only thing that can be illegal is a human action, or in certain cases, a human inaction. So the legality applies to you in the same way that cannabis cannot be legal, because that doesn't mean anything as such. What you mean is that, well, it sounds very absolutist. That's the
And
problem
now,
with that.
interestingly, so what I said, because this again, I'm not sure, right? I said I have a legal prescription.
Yeah, but the other said the cannabis was legal.
Well, that's true,
But
yeah. But
yeah.
so, right, so well, no, what I said was cannabis-based medicinal products
Hmm.
are, I guess I did say legal, but then it's if you've got language being used by people that say they are legally prescribed. What do you
Hmm.
think of that? How does that work in terms of if you were to call yourself, I'm a legally prescribed cannabis patient?
Okay. Well, let's look at that because there's a few examples, and like I say, I don't want to go to the I'm not saying that every little reversal like these transferred
Mm,
epithets that we need to rephrase them
sure.
all. That a reading lamp is no longer a reading lamp because it doesn't read, but it is a lamp to help me with my reading. No, it's not necessary.
Sure.
Um, but I did think it was interesting when we start talking about, like you say, licensed drugs,
Mm,
because that's something that I struggled actually to drop because I kept thinking, well, it says they're in a pot, it's got a label on it. So surely those that, they're being passed, they're being ticked, they're being certified, they're being sniffed at, those those buds are licensed, aren't they?
No,
And
so
yeah,
it's an
yeah,
unlicensed medication,
okay,
but the license is the prescription
okay,
which you are holding, which then and it used to say on these on your prescription packet something about possession without exemption is an offense, something like that, and it stopped saying that. Now it now says you cannot transfer your medication to anyone who isn't you.
but is your medication not manufactured under license then?
So it is it's right, so it's manufactured under a license to produce medical cannabis.
Yes,
However, as a medication,
you've got a prescription.
it's I've got a prescription, but it's an unlicensed medication in terms of the uh,
That the prescription
nice
trumps that, yeah.
protocols.
Right, you've got
Prescription
private
drugs, it's
prescription, yeah.
yeah, but it's a
Okay,
private prescription for an unlicensed medication which has been produced under a Home
okay,
Office license.
okay. So some people would call that the cannabis that you can get, they would say it's licensed. And all I'm saying is if you were to actually continue with my human-centric, person-centric language model, I would just remind people that like what you said, is that cannabis isn't licensed
Mm-hmm.
or unlicensed. Only people having some kind of interaction with it can hold the appropriate licenses or not.
Sure.
So licensing is something that applies to humans.
Mm.
Being taxed is something that applies to humans. Having war declared upon things is actually humans. Um, so, and I'm just saying, reverse it all. If you always put yourself at the center. So your question was specifically about people with how should they refer to themselves, as patients, you mean, or
Yeah,
as
so patients with a prescription which they have an exemption to
yeah.
possess will
Well,
often refer to themselves as legally prescribed.
well, that sounds lawfully or legally prescribed. It sounds okay. My only thought is that everybody should be everybody should be so authorized. If they choose, it should be a matter of choice to have that. So prescription
Mm.
becomes redundant. I do believe in free choice. I had that episode with the exercising dominion of my choices with the COVID malarkey,
Right.
and
So I mean that's coming into these ideas of cognitive liberty, which I was turned on to in my sort of first forays with the Kent Psychedelic Society. I can't remember his name. There was someone who was running an organization called Cognitive Liberty, and I connected with him, Charlotte Walsh as well, Casey, all of these
was
figures
it
at the
Richard
time.
Bois, Glenn Bois, was it?
No, I
I think,
like think
yeah.
his name is Adam something,
Oh, right.
like a young fella. But I remember doing a talk about this at a cannabis conference. I mean, we're talking over 10 years ago, and
Okay, it's
it
cognitive
seemed it
liberty.
yeah, it just seems to be something which has
What's
become
beautiful is
become kind of left
universal.
field idea. Yeah, yeah.
Well, it's beautiful. It's universalist. It's not making a
Mm.
fetish. I didn't pick up before why I was going on about PAR, but what I mean, I refuse to be broken down into uh, all those stages of having to jump through hoops to take what is should be mine by divine rights.
Mm.
And remember, we always seem to think we're asking for something, but we're not. We're asking for things
Yeah,
to be
yeah, yeah,
removed.
yeah.
They've enforced an arbitrary sensorial veil across the human condition, and you'd think we were asking, for lots of extra free electricity or something. We're not asking
No, we're
for
just
anything. We're
asking for
saying
it to
just,
be
yeah,
repealed, right?
yes, yeah, just
Mm.
repeal it. And it's repealable because it's based on an entirely non-legal idea that the state can declare objects to be illicit, and there is no such power. There's no such power. And
Mm.
I believe that when we put ourselves at the center of the way we talk about it, so we could never talk about the legalization of an object, because to do so is to kind of is to defer to slavery. It's we're talking about our liberalization in terms as if it was an object. It's like a slave complains about slavery because the shackles are uncomfortable. It's
Mm.
not. It's not. It's not a subset of. We have to go all the way and make it whole, because the one thing that we've always got in common, it's about ourselves, and who I am is the possibility of free permeability with everything within the ocean of psychedelic and psychoactive molecules that I am permeable to, and I exist in connection with that, to be able to do that without fear of stigma or arrest is required to achieve the next level. Because if you're doing, it's like medical experiments on people because they've got psychological illnesses, and trying to fix them in a society that would otherwise be sending them to jail for doing exactly what you're doing to them.
Mm.
It's so insane that the whole context, the set and setting thing is so much like bigger than people ever want to think about. It literally is like the setting is prohibition.
Yeah.
It always is. And therefore, if you do some medical experiment, you get yourself, all these like extra stars to do things by special entitlement in a white room, curtains, whatever. It's very, very contrived at best. And it's never going to be the connecting thing like you. The mycelium thing um, doesn't have a wall that's made of this is kind of medical and this is religious and this is kind of recreational, man. No,
Yeah, I
that
mean
doesn't go through that.
that stuff's crazy. I've been noticing a lot in the cannabis space where there's this drive from certain areas of the industry to hammer home this idea that people are abusing the medical system, that doctors are recreationally prescribing. It's just again going into these
Labels,
bodies
yeah.
of language that don't really serve anything. When really it's like the wider conversation we need to be having is that we're in a childish situation where we have sort of the worst of both worlds, as far as I'm concerned, with cannabis and other psychedelics, and as well, going through this whole thing of trying to create access from drug to drug to drug
Yeah.
just seems totally insane. It's totally missing the wider issue, and I find it, you know, I engage in a lot of conversations where the response is often, well, that's all well and good, but people
Mm.
need this treatment right now. And we often get brought into the wider narrative of, problem, solution, goal driven targets. We need net zero trauma by 2050 or
Okay.
2070 or whatever it is. And so then people will say to you, and I'm sure you've had this a lot, it's all well and good having these ideas of cognitive
Yes.
liberty, free permeability, but what do you do about this desperate situation? And do
I'll
you
give
think
you a
there is a
positive.
desperate situation?
Yeah. I've
Yeah.
struggled with it, and I've got one positive like thought about this, and sometimes I think I've sold out, but then I think, no, hang on a second, I have to use the cards that I'm being dealt. And I chanced upon, somebody I met at various conferences. She put me in touch with what seems to be like an evolution of PAR on a European perspective. So actually,
Mm-hmm.
we can participate, but not in quite the way they're looking for, which is a million signatories in the EU, and they've
Wow.
gone very far with this in terms of their professionalism. to get 1 million signatures to allow access and facilitate psilocybin treatment for all of these, conditions that doesn't look very different to what you might see stateside or in other initiatives, or but perhaps with a tad less controlling about it, not just saying, these have to be the circumstances and it's only for treatment resistant. I think they're trying to open that up. And I had a look at it and I couldn't quite understand why I was there, because I've always been somebody that's going, no, you're making a bit of a fetish of my freedom here, because I haven't got these conditions. I want something that it has to touch me, has to apply to me, otherwise I can't support it. So I realized why I was there, because when I started to hear some of the ways that they were talking about it, I realized that I wouldn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't do that. Not be, and then they sort of thought, well, hang on a second, this is going to be quite dangerous, because here's somebody coming along from a cognitive liberty kind of like, wants freedom, but not necessarily, it's not like out and out. It means proportional regulation of people. Bear in mind, it's not some kind of
Sure.
like, in madhouse. But I think they're panicked because the respectability of it all is that here we are going for this medical model in with all these professional controls to get this treatment. We want 1 million signatures to make it possible, please. And here's me coming along like, oh no, it's not really about that, guys. And we managed to solve that problem. I've managed to solve it because it's all right to work with what you've got and go for certain things which are certainly like, a bit of a welfare handout rather than a revolution. Okay. I know you're kind of participating in the power struggle by accepting something a bit less than really you should. But that's only the case if by compromising and saying, oh, well, I'd like a prescription and, that's it, my lord, you know, but by compromising certain things, you really do entrench your powerlessness.
Hmm.
But I've found a way to make myself more comfortable with talking the reasonable man talk about, every evolution, not revolution,
Mm-hmm.
is that by deploying the right language, it automatically, without having to even say it, it opens up the space that I'm talking about, and it creates the space for a conversation about liberty and the proportionality for interfering in somebody's private life, and equality and recognition, without having to see it through a medical disease model at all, even though it's been targeted that way. I would support it. And because when I made those suggestions, um, even quite kind of as me in my usual, very, very brusque, you can't say that kind of way. There seems to be going with it. So that's great. I'm really pleased. And all I'm saying is, if you sow those seeds of liberty through your human-centered language, it just opens up doors, because before we're in this like black and white binary nonsense. I always think, why do people use these words black and white when they don't mean black and white? And everything, it should be nuances, but there are no nuances in the. As soon as you use that hyperlogy to give your agency to the object, it's so much easier to be. It's a white or a black object, and that's the enslavement. Everything is should be a continuum of agency, and there should be complete privacy up until the point that you create some kind of wave of havoc for other people.
So
Yeah, go on.
who and where do you think the spaces are to sow these seeds? Because from my perspective, there's, and I'm not being ageist, but there's people in big positions of influence that aren't necessarily that young, that have you know gone about things in a certain way, have a certain narrative, have a certain background, have certain people that they're connected to, which means they can't necessarily diverge from this overwhelming narrative.
Mm.
Do you see hope with
Uh,
groups
mm.
like students, or what are the groups, what are the people that you think would actually be responsive to this way of reframing the conversation?
Right. I got slightly distracted to that question when you used one of my words accidentally.
What was the word I used?
Hope.
Oh, do you not like?
It kind of it breaks me when I hear that
Okay,
because politically, this whole thing is about agency, is about being in action and being active in your own freedom and life.
sure.
And hope is when you are becalmed at sea in a small sailboat and there's no magic that you can do other than hope.
Mm-hmm.
And so hope in the political sphere is always something that kind of triggers me.
Okay.
Because anyway, but that's just it's not that it makes me upset that you said it. I appreciate you said it because it reminds me to remind myself about that and
Sure.
to explain it's not a political power word.
Brilliant. Okay.
So um, the idea is what's the market, the target market?
Mm.
Well, I like to I like to take it like whatever environment that you happen to be in is that it's not right. It's you should not, and I say should not. I don't mean that as a sort of value judgment about your behavior. I mean it almost like a visceral reaction in your own spleen, as it were, that certain things are going to kind of stir you to do something. And I would imagine, I guess, like most people, if you are in any social or educational or work, context, and you see somebody abusing somebody else in a kind of very core way about their identity or their self-worth
Mm-hmm.
and being really unpleasant to them, or in your face that somebody, right, although you want to be like nice and peaceful, like and just chill out with everybody, and even if they've got an issue, let's talk about it. But ultimately you could be provoked by somebody to the point of complete meltdown. And
Mm.
so it's not always appropriate to be calm and professional in when you're being offended. Um, Now, there is no right not to be offended, and I think it's more important that people have the right to be offensive. But if somebody is being offensive to you, I think you should understand when they're being offensive to you, because even if it's unintended, when they discuss this subject in degrading and dehumanizing terms, because they don't understand it, they've never experienced it, or they haven't experienced it in quite, positive ways that are so important to human culture. When they do that, I find it because I feel it. I find it very, very difficult to tolerate, and so I would say that the audience is wherever I am.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Although obviously it's not something that's I found easy to explain. This is kind of like a zenith opportunity with somebody who's very tuned in and very interested to do that. It's not like you could do that across the bar at the club in 2 minutes with somebody's kind of just saying, I think people that use illegal drugs should be shot, and you're just like, I would, how do I go from here? Um, but to get I think that this form of speaking that I'm discussing will become almost mandatory in the sense that there seems to be no happy ground with speech codes in this country, and I don't support speech codes generally.
Mm-hmm.
is that a speech code comes in and it's kind of very fast acting, and people tend to agree it very quickly, because it's this, that, and the other. And then a lot of people might say, no, 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 I must be right wing, but I think that's a load of bollocks. But that's not the conversation we're having, because about this, it's not about being pro anything other than yourself. It's not about.
Mhm.
It's not even about drugs. In fact,
Sure.
it's just literally, are you going to be a individual that can exist in an optimized state of freedom, nothing beyond like even what technology can do now, or whatever, but just, with what we've got, can we make the best of it, please? Or are you going to ruin it with threats of all this stuff and all these divisions from all this bullshit we're doing, whatever it is, all this micromanagement of every single thing, so complicated, cars, bills, purchasing,
Mm.
life. It's so ridiculously bureaucratic when it should be a relaxing and spiritual existence.
Right.
And it's
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
reduced down to all this, crass advertising and crass consumption and fear. And God knows, I mean, this is just the domestic fear, because at least we're not being bombed to death like loads of other people seem to be.
Mm.
Can we kind of happen here? Whatever. Oh yeah, yeah. Missile came here. Yeah, it's just ridiculous. Of course, people are going psychotic, and of course they need, but they would benefit from these compounds, but not as a means of avoiding reality. And I'm saying that because ultimately everything is in our hands through the right language model, because I'm talking about rescuing the agency of the way that it will be spoken to by government effectively. Government will tell you, write something about some drug, and they'll go, well, these drugs are illegal for a reason. And that's the first thing, the binary divide. It's all this division, division, division. This is the first thing. They divided reality into legal and illegal drugs. That's basically psychoactive reality was divided, and in fact, it's actually divided you biochemically with the way you can connect is all skewed to this kind of little green zone, which is alcohol and prescription medications and everything, and it's kind of like that. And everything else is you become a criminal. It's not even available to you, and we need to open up that that reality, not just about a fetish about how drugs will make you feel so much better. It's not even about that. It's about the fact that you are now defining yourself within the reasonable, proportionate principle of not causing harm to others, of being a complete nuisance. And hopefully, I say hopefully, I did it myself, but sorry, shouldn't have said
It's difficult, eh?
that. That was something. Those words, those words, came from a course that Casey recommended. I did. It was the
Mm.
landmark course, and I very strange. It's not that I can get lots of information and then judge it, and then come up with this is good. I tend to. I think I've become what I've been through, and because that course made an impression on me, I now cite those examples as if there were some kind of eternal truths that were carved in stone. And of course, they're not, but they are for me. And I just
Mm.
shared them because at the time I recognized that there was certain importance in those words. So if we're talking about becoming more empowered, I'll connect with that. I hope I'm not breaking their intellectual
Yeah. Yeah.
property. But it, the the idea is that we could speak in two ways, and one is they call is the language of survival, in that your mind wants you to survive, not thrive.
Mm.
So the language of survival is to keep you alive, but avoid some of the like more exciting possibilities. And then, as a counter to that, there's the language of enrollment, whereby you find more possibilities, and contrasted words from both sides. And now it's like programmed in me that I've got a list of words, and then they just immediately take me to this thing where I just have to say, no, I'm not going to say that. So the words specifically are words like decide as opposed to choose.
Mm-hmm.
So when you decide something, you decide upon a course of action, decide we're going to do this. It's kind of your back's up against the wall in some regards, that it's a limited arena that you're operating in, and you've been like forced into going one way or another, and you're weighing up the odds about each thing and you're evaluating the risk. Whereas if you say, well, that's why I decided to use cannabis. And then it's like, oh no, I chose to use it. It's not that you have to explain yourself. I chose it. You decided it because of all these reasons. You gave all these reasons why you decided it. Oh, it's good for me. It lowers my, pain, it lowers my stress, helps with this, helps my appetite, does all these things. You gave all those reasons. But for the choosing, why do you choose it? You don't have to kind of even grant all this,
It's a choice.
reports.
Just a life choice I made.
Yeah, you don't have to explain it to
Yeah, yeah,
to your
yeah.
boss. Why did you do that?
Sure.
So,
It is
so
more empowering, right?
when you say I choose this. And then I said before, like hope is always another one is, well, that goes with hope ahead is I'm hoping for a change.
Mm-hmm.
And a change is sounds great, doesn't it? We need to change the law, change the cannabis law. As if there's not really a cannabis law, but we need to change it. And when you hear that, it's almost like it's something quite mundane, actually, what you're talking about. So you're going to tweak about with something, or it's something you do, you do routinely, like I don't know, change the wallpaper or something. It's just change your underwear. It's like routine.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
what what is the word which opposes that, or not opposes it, which kind of potentiates that into something beautiful, is transformation.
Mm.
So, uh, although you are trying to be reasonable and almost apologetic in asserting how great your stuff is, you could say, well, I'm hoping it will make a change. You've cut yourself down with hope because it's not the same as being in action. The change is now switched people's minds off because it just, oh God, Keir Starmer talks about change. Um, now, so you enter the point of enrollment when I'm in action for transformation.
Mm.
Somebody was saying that they were hoping for to make a difference in the environmental cause. And I said, no, it's not your hope. And a word just came to me, like the landmark thing is strange, that even though you don't know what you're going to say, that sometimes the word will come at the last second. And it was like that. I was just going to tell him, no, you don't hope for it. It is your mission. And as soon
Mm.
as I said that, his eyes just lit up, and he realized that he'd been talking about hope springs eternal and all this crap. And now he's a man on a mission. And just to say that. So there are powers in words, and that's just basic psychology semantics that they got from that course. I know maybe there's critiques of it. I'm not. I just enjoy it, and I think it's interesting.
Mm.
However, the zenith of it is the degradation of the human subject by replacing him with an object, because that's what we're used to doing in everyday speech. And so when it happens in certain places where it shouldn't happen, we don't even notice. And it shouldn't happen with legal, because legal is made of precise words in precise order that define us culturally and, in this case, biomolecularly. And those words are sacrosanct, and we shouldn't just glibly, because we think it's snappy and that makes people happy, that we should be able just to say, yeah, we want to legalize drugs. That's our thing. As soon as you enter that discussion and you say to them, when people you say, I go back to your question now. I remember your question. You say, well, what do you say to older people? Like, be doing this for 30 years. It's all entrenched in their language structure. Well, apart from the fact, it's wrong. It's like, it's just a cliche that you're using. You're speaking in sound bites. Just stop and take the time to examine the soundbite to see if the words that you're adopting as your central thing. There's loads of like ex Twitter handles, legalize cannabis, and they've set themselves up massively, to do it, and they're all very sincere. And as soon as they've invested in it, they'd rather shut it out. They don't want me to hear me, but it is a complete illusion, like looking in a mirror or trying to fight a shadow. It's not, it's so straw man that as you try to engage with that discussion, you're completely wasting your time. It's literally like you are fighting in an inverse reality, and you haven't even worked it out yet. And it's like that phase thing, put it into what opposite phase, change terminals, or what's the other one in outer space, just another parallel universe. Just you've got to switch polarity, because that's reality. So at the moment, this is why I'm saying it's dehypnotizing, is that when I heard a couple of things that, the way that you used your language model, both in the started in a discussion earlier today with voice message. When I heard that, I realized that the programming was strong with this one, still there. But if I'm very, very calm, very, very patient, eventually you'll stop doing it.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that, and I really appreciate you taking the time to go through this, and it's really a fascinating topic that I think it does just require further conversation. We're in, a, what seems to be an insane time with the whole psychedelic space, and I think it's important to maintain this kind of voice. And it's certainly given me a lot of food for thought. I've just got loads of notes written down here, and I think we should just keep having these conversations, and I will really take on board what you've said to find this context to have these conversations, to be anywhere that I'm hearing these things, to pick up on it, and pick up on it within myself as well. So yeah, if you're happy, I think this is probably a good point to end the conversation, and we can
I'll just finish off with just one tiny legal point though, because people are after that kind of opening up, they struggle sometimes to see what the difference would be in terms of the law. And I would just point out that okay, the law's regulating you, not the drugs. And there's loads of sections in our Misuse of Drugs Act which are about that, but they're not actually deployed except for very, very limited purposes, because they hide behind this idea that the drugs are illegal. So there's no need for them.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to see what the difference is, ask me later or next time about how the law regulates us, and it's a question of administration. So what we're complaining about is not the Misuse of Drugs Act, but the misadministration of it based upon these legal misconceptions that I've discussed today. So that's the point of it. I thought I'd better say that in case people are left floundering as to where this goes.